And now it's my pleasure to introduce our editor, our host, and our friend, Nishi Chawla, who is going to be helping us out with running the show itself. And I'm going to introduce her real quick. Let me pull up her information. Here we go. So Nishi Chawla is an academician and writer. She has 6 collections of poetry, 10 plays, 1 feature-length movie, 2 screenplays, and 2 novels to her credit. Nishi's anthology of poems, Singing in the Dark, has been co-edited with K. Sachidanand, has been published by Penguin Random House, and it was in October 2020 when it first came out, so it's still brand new. Nishi holds a PhD in English from the George Washington University here in Washington, D.C. She has also done a 2-year postdoctoral study at the Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. After teaching for nearly 20 years as a tenured professor of English at Delhi University in India, she migrated with her family to a suburb of DC. She has taught at the University of Maryland from 1999 until 2014, and she is now on the faculty of Thomas Edison State University in New Jersey. Nishi's plays get staged in both the United States and in India, and she has also written and directed an independent movie titled Mixed Up. So Nishi, I just want to thank you so much for bringing this to us, for contacting the Writer Center for this event. And I'm going to hand off to you now to introduce the book and then to begin our readings and our discussion. Thanks so much. Thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you, Zach. Thank you. And welcome everyone from a snowbound Washington, D.C. metro area. And today we have a distinguished panel of 8, and of course, including me, would be 9 poets who would read their poems, and time permitting, may also read another poem of their choice from our anthology, Singing in the Dark, that was published by Penguin Random House in October 2020. The poets here are George Szirtes from England, Grace Cavalieri, Geoffrey Himes, Diane Wilbon Parks, Sabine Pascarelli, Raj Nair, Anne Bracken, and Usha Akella. Well, very briefly about our anthology. Our poetry anthology, Singing in the Dark, includes over 100 poetic voices across the globe, responding to and reflecting on these unprecedented times as we are convulsed in and engulfed within the throes of the pandemic. The anthology is a kind of extended meditation on the very nature of our present reality amidst a pandemic. The diverse community of poets from across the globe that we have selected have expressed their sense of transformed reality in acutely sensitive images and tormented poetic words. And the poets have in fact enacted a kind of alchemy in language that is variously exhaustive and intense to make the anthology a powerful and urgently necessary examination of a very challenging and difficult time for all of humanity. The poems offer a variety of modes and tones. Some are conversational, others profound, some are meandering, others are precise, and there are moments of sheer beauty in many poems. Each poem has its own unique tone, and yet these poems tell the story of an anxious, almost a claustrophobic world on pause. The lockdown has transformed our lives and in some ways unlocked our inner world. And as we are confined to our homes, the future feels very uncertain. As we live through this unique history, the anthology becomes a record of our thoughts, our existential questions, concerns, experiences of living through the pandemic. These poems are personal narratives and testament, often therapeutic, sometimes sad and angry, or funny and optimistic, a kind of outlet of our fears, hopes, and joys, helping us make sense of this new world order and our place in it. I'll invite George Szirtes to read his poem from our anthology, Singing in the Dark. Very briefly about George Szirtes. He was born in Hungary and emigrated to England with his parents, survivors of concentration and labor camps after the 1956 Budapest uprising. Szirtes is a British poet and translator from the Hungarian language into English. His first book, The Slant Door, won the Faber Memorial Prize. Bridge Passages 1991 was shortlisted for the Whitbread Poetry Prize. Reel 2004 won the T.S. Eliot Prize, and his new and collected poems was published by Blood Axe in 2008. He has been a member of the Royal Society of Literature since 1982. George will read the last sonnet from his sequence. And one thing that strikes me about Szirtes' haunting poems is the tension, which may be partly a result of displacement and the consequent negotiation between a European sensibility and British culture. In particular, the loss of his earliest home, the city of Budapest, renders the past deeply ambiguous, vulnerable to the reconstruction of memory. Szirtes has described his poems as buildings, and their formal structures do have an architectural quality, which his reading will bring out. Over to you, George.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for including me in the anthology and for a very generous introduction. Just to put this into context, I've been writing short poems daily almost since the beginning of lockdown. This is from a set of 5, as you've mentioned, which are 5 formal sonnets, in fact. And one of the things that struck me about our situation with this new pandemic was that it wasn't the first, and that there had been a series of these regularly through the history of humanity. So the other sonnets include on smallpox, Black Death, cholera, Spanish flu, and then we come down to COVID-19, which is ours, which is the one I'm going to read. And this poem, I suppose, concentrates on those who suffered most, the poorest people stuck in high-rise blocks. So this is COVID-19. Now here we are in quarantine, our ears sharpened to the footsteps stalking us. We watch the passing of the empty bus as one more phantom carrier appears and swerves around us, grinning as he goes. I swear the poor are jammed into their rooms to gaze from blocks that reek too much of tombs intended for them, while the virus throws its net across the whole estate like smoke. Observe, Highness, how some of them remain still poorer. And while you and I should live, survival will be harder to forgive. Though later, it might serve for a black joke that you, Highness, might very well explain.
Thank you, George. Very interesting. Before we move on to our next poet, can you just very briefly tell us why the historical settings, why this form, and
Sure. I suppose in a way there's the everyday response to things changing. And at the beginning, one doesn't know very much. One is constantly living at the ends of one's nerves. But then I thought, this is not the first time this has happened to us. It isn't the first time. It is one of a recurring cycle of events, nor is it likely to be the last time. And I wanted to try and place it in a historical context, hence these other plagues, so as to be part of a historical continuum, really. So in a way, it was one way of getting away from my own very personal hands-on kind of responses, and to try and, I'm well used to writing sonnets over the many years. I've written several hundred, I suppose. And in a way, it is a way of compressing while at the same time allowing the various forms to flow within them. So there's a kind of counterpoint music in them to my ear. Hence the sonnet, because I'm familiar with the form. And hence the choice of, if you like, trying to stand away and trying to see us at a certain point of time, rather than being completely engulfed by the whole thing.
Thank you so much. Yes, I could sense that music in your voice, and the complexity of your work is just hauntingly beautiful. Thank
Thank you.
you. We turn now to Grace Cavalieri. She is Maryland's 10th Poet Laureate. She's written 22 books and chapbooks of poetry and 26 produced short form and full length plays. Her newest poetry publications are What the Psychic Said 2020 and Showboat 2019. Her latest play was Quilting the Sun, Theater for the New City, New York City in 2019, when the pandemic, of course, struck and consumed all of humanity. Grace Cavalieri is the host of the radio program, The Poet and the Poem, presented by the Library of Congress through National Public Radio. What strikes me about your poetry, Grace, is its sheer luminescence. Don't ask me what I mean by that. I will let your listeners endorse my opinion as you read your poem, Word Prisoner.
Thank you, Nishi. And thank you for this beautiful contribution to our culture. I'm so honored to be included. I'm going to read a poem that is about silence because there is silence and isolation, and that's why it was all the more important to write the poem. Dear Word Prisoner, from here you can see the water past craggy purple rocks, stretches of green, rusted rooftops, limbed fields. Yet this is not enough. Spirits need language. And what does it matter unless we can describe the outdoor air at dark, the late night owl or fox, walls leaning thick with loss, stones large with dirt and leaves and moss. Many souls lived and walked here on their way to heaven. What led them on, glittering with love of luck? Tell me what world we can speak of if it is not this. The roaring of the ocean, the emptiness of winter's gate. I visited these places, but left for all the words that could not touch them. Anything I say, squeal, cry, yelp, sigh out loud, say something, mouth, say summer, say talk of hands that held here, whose? The covert feathers rest silent in the tree for lack of sound from heart. Dear tongue, breath, don't leave me here alone with all this disappearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace. Pray tell us, why would you chase silence in this poem, please?
Well, it is said that silence is where God lives. And if you don't want to go for that, you can agree that silence is where creativity lives. And to make something of nothing is what we had to do in the pandemic. So thank you for that question.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We move now to Geoffrey Himes, a very well-known American poet, music critic who has written weekly for the Washington Post since 1977. He has also written for No Depression as a contributing editor since 1998 and has written for Paste since 2004. He has written lyrics for songs that have been recorded by multiple artists, including Billy Kemp and the Paradise Rockers and Moho Filter. He has won the Deems Taylor Award from the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers 4 times. His stage musical, A Baltimore Christmas Carol, broke box office records at the Patterson Theater in Baltimore in 2004. Mr. Himes will read his poem, March 2020. Geoffrey, you write that history should be taught backward. The problem with history is that it is taught in the wrong direction. Would you say that of poetry in general or of your own poetry? And as you read March 2020, do you also comment on the contrast between nature imagery and disease imagery in your poem? Dr. Sachidanandan and I were kind of, very struck by whatever you sent us. And of course, we included your poems in our anthology. Over to Mr. Himes.
There we go. All right. I wrote this in March 2020, in the very early days of the pandemic when we were still trying to figure out what it was. And, often when art deals with terrible things, it surrounds it with terrible weather and, the pathetic fallacy and, dark skies and hail and whatever. But this past spring, as this pandemic set in, it was one of the most beautiful springs we've had here in Baltimore. And I was struck by that contrast and, everything's horrible, but it's beautiful outside. And so I decided to play with that in this poem. March 2020. The weather outside is spring glorious, sun-soaked, green-grassed, daffodil-dappled. It's the weather inside, within our bodies, that is storm-blown and ice-locked. Tiny, spiky balls bounce through our arteries. Pinballs no flippers can stop from the cavities they crave. They drop into our lungs where they hatch babies like rabbits in skin-shiny lesions. Whenever we open the front door, we're masked like outlaws, gloved like butlers. The only thing we can share is distance, measured by the length of a corpse. When we walk through the petal twirling breezes, sharp knives, too small to see, seeking our orifices, come flying. After many months of purgatory, when the now blossom-blanketed trees are bare and dusted with snow, what will we salvage from the wreckage? When the windscape turns wintry, will our insides at long last have their spring glorious breaking of buds into blossoms? Now, as I said, I wrote this in March, and I was hoping that by January, when trees are dusted with snow, it would all be over and we'd have, looking at it in the rearview mirror. Unfortunately, I'm not a good prognostician.
Thank you. Yes, poetry indeed has always provided a deep source of power and wisdom in the darkest times. When we send our writing prompt to poets from across the globe, inviting them to write, we used a line, I don't know if you remember, from Native American poet, who's now, of course, the poet laureate of United States, Joy Harjo, perhaps the world ends here. We turn now to Diane Wilbon Parks. She's an American poet, visual artist, and author. She has 2 collections of poems and a children's book. Diane is the founder of The Right Blend, a culturally diverse poetry ensemble, and a member of the Voices of Woodlawn Poetry Collective. She's been recognized as a 2020 Prince George's County Poet of Excellence. Diane celebrated the permanent installation of one of her poems and artwork at the Patuxent Research Refuge North Tract. Diane's poetry has been featured widely and included in national and international anthologies. She is also included in the 43rd and 44th anniversary of Grace Cavalieri's The Poet and the Poem at the Library of Congress. She is also a US Air Force veteran and a senior IT program manager, wife and mother, wears multiple hats. And of course, there's so much virtuosity in Diane's paintings as well as the poetry, as she will sample it for you now. Over to Diane, please.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nishi Chawla. I too am so grateful to be included in this anthology. The title of my poem in the anthology is Isolated Wings. We are snowed in spring, listening to indulgence from the chirps of birds, fluttering feet, and faces of sun-drenched homes rising, opening the gold of blue skies. The world props against windows and doors, wishing for wings and the songs of birds. For more than 40 days, we've been flying into windows with untrained wings, caged inside walls, inside oily fingerprints left on glass. I keep wiping the edges of you off, cleaning the traces of your wild baby's breath, now marred with Lysol. April cringes inside its bloom, afraid to lurk beyond its curled tongue leaflet buds. Windows listen for wind-rushed poetic mewlings. The color of dance is a strong song, wept in a brush of uncut grass, and the husk of sycamore trees, sleeves of rice bleed grain by grain. We eat sparingly. We see a man dancing in the center of the earth with meat skins whistling sound like flutes. These isolated, iridescent wings can't fly. Even fish feathers into water. Life is still a flutter, paddled fins wade in waters that still flow, and the mist of white clouds return blue. The world props against cheeks and chests. Windows lick the oily salt of our skin, while fingers flap in and out of dreams. Unmasked words wish to be free again. With outstretched wings, we lift our opens, point our perched bodies to the wind. We twist our cages and bend them back, while the cageless man still dances in the feathers of his skin. Thank you.
Very thought-provoking, Diane. Would you like to speak about how you felt about 40 days of isolation as your poem Time taps the spring and the isolation of the pandemic?
Yes, 40 days into the pandemic, I just felt so very isolated. And as a matter of fact, as I was looking outside and seeing the birds, I transformed into a bird myself, metaphorically, because being in these walls, it was all new, being isolated, social distancing. This was new, being caged, almost like a caged bird, if you will, flying into these walls, untrained wings. I just felt as if I was watching the freedom of birds flying, them chirping and singing, and really not knowing what we were up against in this human condition of the pandemic, as well as the isolation. So a lot of things we took for granted. And then looking out the window and watching the bird as free, as carefree as can be, it was amazing to me. So that really is the derivative of how I wrote this poem and why.
Wonderful. 40 days has religious resonances and imagery as well. Well, I'm a Hindu by birth, but I, of course, endorse and respect all religions. And, having studied and taught literatures from across the world for maybe 40 years, 4 decades, I've been teaching. But before that, of course, all of my formal training and all, so it has its own resonances. So thought-provoking. Thank you so much, Diane. We turn now to Sabine Pascarelli, an Italian poet from Tuscany near Florence, and she's joining us now from Italy. Sabine grew up in Germany, where she earned a degree in German language and literature at Dortmund University. She's a published poet, an author of children's literature, and a translator of English, German, and Italian. Her recent books of translated book poems include The Alchemy of Grief by Emily Ferreira, winner of the, some poetry award, I dare not mispronounce it. So I turn things over to Sabine first.
Okay, hello to you all. My poem has been written on a certain day, and it's called May 20, 2020. I watch the behavior of the people on the street. A variety of stories lie hidden behind the protecting masks. Is this the end of trust? Eyes don't meet eyes. hands pointed to the ground, empty of gestures, feet moving in silence. The young woman working in the studio of an architect takes off her mask to greet me. How are you? Without waiting for my answer, she assures me of how well she is, eyes contradicting lips. Times are tough for so many, she adds. Her voice is a balance of fear and control. I wish I could say something of comfort as she walks away. Half down the street, I see her speak to someone else. Aimless love keeps us in its claws, I think. I don't know how this sentence comes to me.
Sabine, could you briefly comment on the last two lines of your poem, Aimless Love Keeps Us in Its Claws? I don't know how the sentence comes to me. What do these last two lines mean, pray?
Well, I still don't know about the origin of this sentence. It came to me while I was writing the poem, and if it came out of the blue or if I unconsciously have heard or read it somewhere, I don't know. And of course, I was asking myself if there wasn't a bigger picture, a cosmic picture behind what we were experiencing. And through noticing little things and writing them down, I hoped to catch a glimpse of something that could help me to understand on a different level. And I still trust there is love involved, not a romantic, good feeling love that we wish into our lives, but an aimless love that is not focused, a kind of rough love that just is. And though kicking and screaming and not understanding, we are caught in its claws that are hurtful, but gratefully never let us go.
Thank you so
That's,
much. The apparatus of
thanks
poetry
to you.
contains so much. Yes, the apparatus of poetry is kind of, it keeps widening its stretch. We now turn to a poet from Australia. Well, he was born in my birth country, Raj Nair. He's published his first poem at the age of 11. He's written poems, short stories, and novels in his native language, Malayalam. He's from Kerala originally. I believe, Raj, your grandfather, I read somewhere in Wikipedia, was a very well-known, artist. Or you could perhaps talk about that. He writes in his native language, Malayalam, as well as in English. He's also a writer-director of feature and documentary films. He was educated at Harvard University, University of London, and he also holds a PhD from the University of Hong Kong. He is currently a professor of oral medicine in Queensland, Australia. Over to Raj Nair.
Thank you. Can you all hear me, I hope? It's early morning here on a Monday morning, 6:30 almost. I'm waking up and I don't think it's the right time to recite a poem, but thank you, Nishi, for the kind introduction and including my poem in your book. My poem is titled Easter. It is Easter today. I walked with the silent creatures who began to chat with me. It makes me listen to the voices we had forgotten to hear. Everything should rise from the dead today. The peacock dances like a rainbow in the black tar on the road. Turtles lay eggs on my salt-laden sand. The sand commanded me, rise. Birds fly down from the sky to clean my grain-heavy palms. Their wings, now freed from fear, commanded me, rise. The fish in the water sleep on my toes. The eyes of the sleeping fish commanded me, rise. You and I should not forget to resurrect today, said the wayward wind, free from the smell of smoke. Today, silent creatures kept me company during my walk. Thank you.
Thank you, Raj Nair. It reminds me that, poetry is an expression of universally held symbols and myths, what can also be called the collective unconscious. We turn now to Anne Bracken. She's authored 2 poetry collections, No Barking in the Hallways, Poems from the Classroom, and The Altar of Innocence. She serves as a contributing editor for Little Partisan Review and co-facilitates the Oscar Wilde Readings Poetry series. Her poetry, essays, and interviews have appeared in anthologies and journals, including Women Write, Resistance, Mad in America, Fledgling Rag, Lumox, Awakenings Review, and Gargoyle. Anne's poetry has garnered 2 Pushcart Prize nominations, and her advocacy work centers around arts-based interventions for mental health, education, and prison reform. Over to Anne Bracken.
Thank you, Nishi. It's a pleasure to be here and hear all of this wonderful poetry. I'm going to read a poem called The Importance of Flowers. And I'd like to echo what Jeff said about last spring being one of the most beautiful springs that we've ever had. And one day I was walking, and that's where I got the inspiration for this poem. The Importance of Flowers. Rescuing a cluster of pink blossoms lying next to the sidewalk, I inhale my mother's silk scarf and cradle the velvet petals. Immediately, I'm caught in the slipstream of time, emerging as a little girl in a blue jumper, carrying a bouquet of fresh flowers. That morning, my mother braved a thicket of spring grass to snip forsythia and cut bunches of lily of the valley. She wrapped the flowers in waterlogged paper towels, secured with wax paper and a loose rubber band. I felt special that day, bringing flowers from Mary's altar, set up in the front of my 4th grade classroom. I cupped the pink flowers in my palm as carefully as I carried the Mary bouquet to school. Inscribed in my memory, a soft focus Polaroid of the days when the Hail Mary was a rote prayer, recited before every class, and the phrase, now and at the hour of our death, held no fear. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. The essence of poetry, of course, is the attempt to bring about an altered state of consciousness where the reader can experience more than the words on the page. And, I thought the pink blossoms, what was it about the pink blossoms that evoked the memory of your childhood? Because as you read, it kind of triggered my own memories of my late mom.
I just somehow holding those flowers in my hand and inhaling their wonderful fragrance, the memory just came to me of taking flowers to school and how special that was to bring flowers to school. And then the idea of the prayer came in, and I thought of all those years of praying in Catholic school and saying the Hail Mary and never ever thinking, what does it mean now and at the hour of our death? That never scared me. I guess it was just rote words that I wasn't really thinking about. And all of a sudden they had meaning during the pandemic.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
We turn now to Usha Akella. I hope I'm pronouncing your last name. I try to check with you. Usha Akella has authored 9 books that include poetry, 1 chapbook, and 2 musical dramas. Her latest poetry volume is due for publication by the noted feminist press Spinifex Australia in April 2021. Her last poetry book, The Waiting, was published by Sahitya Academy, the National Academy of Literature in India. She's the founder of Matwala, the first South Asian Diaspora Poets Festival in the United States. And She's also curated a website of interviews along with David Kopatz. She was selected as a creative ambassador for the city of Austin for 2019 and 2015. Welcome, Usha, from Austin, Texas, please. Is Usha here with us?
Hi, sorry, I was muted. I didn't realize. Thank you, Nishi, so much for all the work that went into this voluminous volume of poetry. That's indeed a record of a very strange time we're passing through. Thank you, Zach, for hosting this wonderful event. I'm going to read my poem that's titled Caved 7.8 billion, and the title plays off COVID. And it kind of resonates with that orally. 1. This one looks like a planet of red windmills, whirring, or a field of poppies, a wild corona of a star, heart of sunflower. This pretty thing is fanged, arsenal in death's stockpile. Small unseen things are perfectly precise. Hanuman burnt the city of Lanka thus, eroding pride. 2. The bush is bursting with red berries. Spring has slipped through the crevices, breathing green on the city. A musician plays his oud to the sky in himself. The trees are gravestones to the forgotten dead. The deer conglomerate driven to community. More families staked by windows notice the heartbeat of nature. 3. The camera has vertigo. It's a crazy arc leering on the hoarded splendor of one family. Lines of bottles on the kitchen cabinetry, riddled with oil of bright urine hue. Toilet rolls, bounties, tissues, food cans, a pantry full of debris for doomsday. The raid of the innards of stores, this back to basics, to Freud's Eid of fear and self first. 4. Where do we send our unclaimed sorrow, the unlabored debris of life, the racking cough of unprocessed wounds? There is no island to send them off, be done, be free, like those lines of caskets in dirt in Hart Island, where New York City is belching unclaimed bodies, its gut overflowing. 5. The mind is like an abacus now, computing deaths on the Excel sheet of consciousness, from the Spanish flu 20 to 50 million, from the Black Plague 50 million, from COVID. What black hole continues to gorge up souls, or is it an empyrean of hopeful light? What joust happens in the universe's annals between what forces this unending play into and out of life? Where is that mighty being who once gave the song of life to a tremulous warrior's heart in the middle of battle? Each of us is a naive question, as we have always been, curved like an embryo, full stopped by death. Thank you.
Thank you, Usha. Yes, poets are restless innovators who disrupt generic conventions, and they break up the coherence of simple poetry and bring into our own poetry an intense personal ambivalence. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I will read my own poem, Inside Myself. The virus licks my torn soul, guilt-tripping me. I sing a love song to it, tempting the faint thump, causing my heart to fissure its fatty lumps. Pretend I live on a moon of my own landing, turn my flesh inside out, listen to the chirping of birds, amazed that so much beauty could still exist amid club-like spikes that crush the breathing soul, lavender storms that hit unfounded hopes cluster phylogenetically, a pestilence that asks for enormous surcharges, lethal as the protein cry of daggers, stabbing me yet again, quietly slithering out, a warlike stratagem, as birds orchestrate their cheerful songs to each other, embraced in positive sense RNA. The hard truths that no flowers on our windowsills would relive, proteins that slice human voices, sliced lungs pause, then breathe. When I follow its replication pattern, somewhere a flood of tears ensue, attached to a host receptor, slyly pursuing a purpose-driven path. Winter turns into stunned spring, and yet the stalk of the spike molecule digs deep within, encodes hollow dreams, hollowed out. In the open fields, the birds shriek with intense, tormented sounds, adopt a transmembrane-like structure, and more are rendered mute, transfixed fear, packaging signals of sliding down, motionless companions that express a fear, triggering viral particles, spreading out, binding domains of dazed displeasure, disbelief, a tissue culture, receptors and proteins that inject so much, a solar vision that gives me a new calm, a prayer that sparks nuclear capsids of refined pleasure, gone. I struggle with myself again, umpteen times more. Well, thank you for your patience. We have we move now to the second part of our program today. In the second part of our program, our featured poets, 9 of us, will read any one poem of their choice from our anthology, Singing in the Dark. We'll begin with George Szirtes, who would like to read Mangalesh Darbar's poem, Touch. Sadly, Mangalesh Darbar, he left for his heavenly abode a few weeks ago. Over to George Szirtes.
Yeah, sorry, it was a great shock. I'd met Mangalesh in Delhi at a poetry festival, and it was one of those things where I immediately liked somebody. He was born in the same year as I was, so we had something in common. The poem is called Touch, and it, if you like, it posits touch and non-touch as opposites. Touch is associated with everything that is tender. He once said something like, he thinks all the best poems are love poems of one sort or another. And I think this too is that. So you begin with the objects on his desk, and you move away and you begin to think about even writing as an act of a finger touching water, touching paper. And then he considers the forces ranged against touch, against tenderness. And these to be the forces that are based on ideas, on dogmas, and so forth. So I read Touch. Touch the things that are kept on the table in front of you. Clock, pen stand, an old letter, idol of Buddha, Bertolt Brecht and Che Guevara photos. Open a drawer and touch its old sadness. Touch a blank sheet of paper with the words fingers. Touch like a pebble, the still water of a Van Gogh painting, starting life's hullabaloo in it. Touch your forehead and hold it for a long while without feeling shame. To touch isn't necessary for someone to sit close. It is possible to touch even from very far, like a bird from a distance who keeps her eggs protected. Please do not touch, or touching is prohibited. Don't believe in such phrases. These are long-running conspiracies, religious gurus holding flags, wearing crowns and shawls, bomb throwers, war raisers indulging for keeping us apart. The more dirt, the more waste they spit. Only by touch can they be cleansed. Touch you must, even though it turns things topsy-turvy. Don't touch the way gods, priests, bigots, devotees, disciples touch each other's feet and heads. Rather, touch the way the tall grass appears to caress the moon and stars. Go inward, feel the moist spot touch. See if it still remains there or not in these ruthless times.
Thank you, George. I hope I'm not putting you on the spot, but I believe one of your favorite quotes is Emily Dickinson's, "Art is a house that tries to be haunted." Would you like to just say anything, in response to your favorite quote?
Yes, a number of people have talked about poems as hauntings of sort. A Houseman said that if he recited certain poems as he was shaving, his beard would stand up and he could shave more easily. Other people talk about a shiver down a spine. And I think there should always be the sense that something is haunting language, and that to try and build, you can try to build a house, but you have to entice the ghost in or to find the ghost within it. I think that lies at the heart of most successful poetry in different ways, in different peoples.
What an honor indeed, George Szirtes, to listen to you and to hear you talk and read your own poem, as well as Mangalesh Dabral's, who's no longer with us. Well, poetry speaks to people more than ever. With the accessibility of technology and social media, it is easy to share poetry and spread poems across the internet, especially during times when people are longing to identify with their feelings of isolation, defeat, disappointment, loneliness. I believe we poets are aware of what is going on in the world around us and take personal experiences to provide a lens to connect those to cultures from across the globe. Grace, do read a poem for us and tell us what cultural connections can you draw from the poem that you choose to read now. Over to Grace Cavalieri.
Thank you, Nishi. I've chosen a poem by J. Joy Matthews Alford, who's known to many of us as Sister Joy. She's a force in Maryland and has co-edited great poetry activity. So I want to talk about her poem because it starts in a place, and I like it when a poet can put us in her shoes and then we have her point of view. So it makes it very clear where the poem begins. And she does this, and I will read the poem. Standing here, the world looks bright. It's called Kitchen Window. I'll start again. Standing here, the world looks bright. Squirrels still scamper, and red-breasted robins hop amid my freshly cut lawn. A lone but lovely lilac bush, and soon to bloom forsythia, soothe my spirit. All seems right with the world through this window. Countless have been the tranquil hours we have shared. She has been my respite, affording me moments of peace and serenity amid life's tumultuous storms, shielding me, albeit momentarily, from some of life's harshest realities. Her gently framed view of the world provides, even now, a pastoral view that is sacred to my soul. I come to this sacred space knowing it has been given to me for things such as this, when reality overwhelms and would deny the notion that beauty still exists. This space, where even washing a dish can return calm and control to my life, banishing such blight as disease and pandemics, signals that the ravages of devastation and loss linger too so very close by. So I like very much how Joy has taken the most ordinary thing in the world, a kitchen window. And here the poet is washing dishes. What could be more mundane? But to elevate a simple act by transformation, by making another thing of it, a work of art, is to me, it doesn't get much better than that. To me, it's just a miracle to take washing dishes and looking out a window and imagine having this window be her respite, having this window be a sacred space. I think that that is worth honoring.
Thank you so much. You are truly an inspiration to me, Grace Cavalieri. Thank you. Well, words of wisdom from Maya Angelou. She writes, well, she wrote, I can be changed by what happens to me, but I refuse to be reduced by it. Yes, of course, adversity is fortune's school, and its lessons fill the air. Geoffrey Himes will now read a poem on adversity, and he'll also tell us how adversity inspires poetry. Over to Geoffrey Himes.
Thank you, Nishi. This is a poet. This is a poem called "Wave" by a South African poet named Michael Cope, who I was unfamiliar with until I started reading this anthology. And it's one of the great things about this anthology is that, you know, you can discover so many voices that you were unacquainted with before. It's called "Wave." What is it to see the wave front coming? What is it to say we're all in trouble? What is it to say that when the bubble bursts, we'll fall, pour first into the humming dark, and there'll be scarce loot in the rubble? What is it to feel the front of the nearing blaze? Why is it that we turn away? Is it because the day is too long? Is it we feel we are not strong enough to look that way? Is it that the feel of looking's wrong and we'd rather remain in the days? How high is the crest of the wave? Is it brown with ooze or blue or a deeper hue? Do we wonder what we can save in its face, grasp at a few random things, or do we look away? Why has the tide gone out so far and so suddenly? Why do the elephants break free from their chains and charge off among the high trees? And, you know, in terms of what you were asking, Nishi, is that I think we don't, the poems that I really like are not poems about explaining something we already know, but exploring something we don't quite understand yet. And I think that this poem is, you know, evoking this year of emergency that we've had and posing questions about how can we respond to it? Can we confront it, look at it head on? How do we size it up? And, or do we look away? Or, you know, and I love the way it ends about the elephants breaking free from their chains and charging off among the high trees, which is an image both of liberation and of chaos at the same time. And I like that the sort of rhythmic repetition in the poem, and as these rhetorical questions pile up, and as the questions are addressed to the reader is forced to try to answer them and become a participant in the poem.
Thank you so much, Geoffrey Himes. Yes, as Emily Dickinson writes, if I feel physically as if the top of my head were taken off, I know that is poetry. As one of the most compressed art forms, poetry relies on rich and sensuous imagery to convey meaningful experiences that have the power to evoke in us. Diane Wilbon Parks will read a poem by Will, one of the poets in our anthology, Israeli poet Amir Or.
Yes, you know, I love this poet, Amir Or. And the last time I read Reflection, so this time I'll read his poem, Camera Obscura. Darkness doesn't distinguish between things. doesn't recognize you except by your voice, wandering among the echoes, by the sour smell of your fear, by your desire to rip your image out of the darkness, to rip a shadow for yourself out of the shadows. Darkness is a womb without walls. There's only myself inside myself. In the dark, locked room, a child learns to listen, touch, be pulse, and skin. It's a short poem, but wow, it packs a lot of imagery for me.
Thank you. Yes, Diane, he'll be there, Amiror, on February 18th. And I know you will also be co-reading with him. He's just confirmed to me that he will be there at the Politics in Prose virtual session on February 18th. So, well, you can, all of us can be there again. Would you like to
That's
comment on the imagery in his poem?
I loved his imagery. And I can't wait to meet him because I love his work. I just love the fact that he says in the first sentence, darkness doesn't distinguish between things, doesn't recognize you. I love that. That really talks about the pandemic. It talks about the social issues that we've been having. It speaks on so many different levels. So I can't wait to meet him.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yes, sure. Imagery is one of the literary devices that engages the human senses, sight, hearing, taste, touch. It's as important. Imagery is perhaps as important as metaphor and simile and can be written without using any figurative language at all because it represents object, action, idea, which appeal to our senses. And sometimes I just feel, as you were reading this poem, imagery can become more complex. The right images used by a poet can portray more than, a picture or a painting or, a photograph. We turn now to Raj Nair, who will be reading my co-editor, Dr. Sachidanand's poem.
Thank you again. The poem by Sachidanand, The Circle, I'll be reading The Circle. Just about Sachidanand, I grew up listening to his poetry in high school and college days back in India before I left India. So I know been known to his poetry for a very long time. And since he can't make it today, I thought I'll pick this song. And it also, it's actually, as an Indian, you probably understand a little more than the others because of the concepts of rebirth. We call them the Punarjanma, and also it is on a metaphysical level. I felt, it is the potentiality and actuality in between, the conflict between those two things. And it's about pain, it's about joy, sorrow, grief. So I thought I will read that one. So joy is a narrow space between two sorrows, a space lit by the morning sun, where a sunflower is in bloom amidst fresh blades of grass that two people can hardly occupy, and maybe a pale butterfly too. You can dance there with movements and gestures possible in that narrow space, and sing in a low voice, can even laugh mildly, tickling the baby sunlight. But there is little time. You know it too. The sun will soon grow harsh. Sorrows will squeeze you from both sides. You may even get trapped there, never able to get out. When the whole body bleeds, you may suspect that joy is but a snare. It is not all wrong, but you are able to see the flower and the dance. But pain, it is eternal, and its space infinite, like the abyss that once trapped the earth. You'll have to leave the earth to see there are stars even there. Who knows? Your soul may fly across many light years to land in a star. It will gain a new body there. Then you'll know joy is but a narrow space between two sorrows. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Raj Nair. This is very deeply philosophical, and thank you, K. Sachidanandan, who's in India, perhaps sleeping at this time. Wallace Stevens would write, poets acquire humanity. Poets acquire humanity. And I would counter that they bequeath humanity to our all too human earth. We turn things over now to Sabine Pascarelli. She would like to read a poem of her own choice. Sabine.
Okay, I have chosen the poet Arundhati Subramaniam. She's an Indian poet, and I loved her poetry I found in the book. And the poem I'm reading is called The News. The news. Learn something new every day, say the wise ones. And so we try. The news today is that there's no one at the Champs-Élysées, no one at the gateway of India, no one at all in the spice market of Istanbul, the souk at Aleppo, that the great theaters and pulsating green rooms of the world lie plunged in darkness, that pigeons hover like suspended confetti about the piazza of San Marco, that no one's ordering double macchiatos in the East Village cafes, that a woman walking back to her village from Telangana died of starvation in a Chhattisgarh forest. Her news, and it isn't particularly new, is that we're always 11 miles away from home. So what I liked about this poem is that she gets us the feeling of the situation through writing about what not is. She describes all these beautiful places we all know and that we have witnessed, empty of people, and no sign of those mundane ephemeral activities that we are used to see. And all life is suspended as if the world is holding the air after an in-breath. And the left alone places appear insignificant and meaningless without us infusing them with our energies. And they really seem to be in a parallel world, not belonging to us anymore. And then she comes to tell us about this woman that is walking a long way towards her home. And she brings us to understand that we are not different from this woman. Always in our way to arrive at a place of belonging is a never-ending process, and that we are always 11 miles from home. And I was wondering about what this 11 could mean. And someone speaks of it as a number of that is material in nature, and is followed by the number 12 that is immaterial and spiritual. And so 11 could be referring maybe to the success and fulfillment in life that is connected to the material world, that keeps us at a distance from, from home, that is the symbol for our spiritual fulfillment. And I must say, I liked very much the spiritual approach to this pandemic that is, without any doubt, that is there.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. From Italy to India to the United States to every nation, every town, every place, this deep tissue of poetry that connects all of us, that binds us all in our quintessential humanity. Yes, good poetry should be rich in imagery. And through imagery, the reader imagines a similar sensory experience. Obviously, it will involve imagination. So, I would completely agree with you, Arundhati. Subramaniam's poem is kind of so rich with imagery, and therefore it kind of, touches your heart as well as mine, and binds us all culturally and emotionally in our humanity. We turn things over now to Usha Akella, and she will read the poem of her choice. Usha?
Hello, everyone. I've chosen Varsha Saraya Shah's poem. She's a Texan poet. She lives in Houston. She's read for us at Matwala a few times, and we consider her a Matwala poet. The reason I picked her poem was I was very struck by the imagery, and I'll talk about the imagery after the poem. I speak from towers of silence. It is spring. People are afraid to sit on empty benches in parks, self-distancing. Coffins length apart, no matter where on the street or at work, dreading a footloose and lethal microbe. Hugs are hats hung at the back door. Babies like flowers can't stop being born. Mamas in hazmat suits swollen with milk weep for their misfortune. Imagine a massing of crows on terrace gathered for feast to appease the dead. Vultures plucking at corpses. I wish not to pollute air or water, earth or fire. Let birds of prey feed on us. Fire, good fire, that burns to cleanse us all of hunger and passion, anger and emptiness. Assure the earth, it makes us part of our dirt. Tell the skies, merge in your stardust. O invisible, can you hear our dirge? Italians belting out operas alone, tarantellas on balconies. Hear the Spaniards banging pots, strumming guitars in night skies. Indians trumpeting conches, chanting Om, Om, Om. So it's a beautiful, I think it has many moods and flavors within the poem. And I made a few notes about the imagery. What I really was struck by that, the imagery begins right in the title, and it uses a very powerful literary and cultural trope loaded with significance, which is the tower. The poet's intended reference is to the Dakma, the Parsi and Tibetan place for the ritual of the dead, where the practice of excarnation happens. It signifies the forced isolation caused by the pandemic and its consequence of communication breakdown. That's also birthed newer modes of communication. Tower in Western literature references the Tower of Babel in the Bible, a story of disintegrating communication again. Tower also brings to mind the lady in the tower image in fairy tales like Rapunzel, an eerie and ambiguous tale of rescue and deliverance. Then the tower again is a major tarot card with twin symbolic implications as adversity or a character's lofty vision. And idiomatically, in ivory tower, there's a denotation again of isolation and being above others, usually with a break from reality. So the title emphasizes the self as a fortress, self-distanced in the circumstance of the pandemic as a forced choice, guarded, aloof, lone, isolated, in need of rescue. Each of us has become one, and the paradox is the voice of the writer emerges from this silence. Usually at the end of fairy tales and myths, towers are breached. They are illusory symbols of strength, metaphorically, seemingly solid symbols of a country's impenetrability crumble. Think of modern towers such as the World Trade Centers or the recent insurrection at the Capitol. So in the face of the pandemic, we were exposed to horror cities of cities dealing with the disposal of the dead, which circles back to the metaphor of the funerary site. So I thought it was such a loaded term, the tower, and it brought so many associations to my mind.
Thank you. Thank you, Usha. Thank you. And I hope you feel better. I hope our audience is not getting too restive and restless with our poetry session. I would like to, when I planned this poetry session, I thought I would bring at least 10 poets from about 140 poets from across the globe that are included in this anthology. So I asked Nikola Mazurov, who is a Macedonian poet, born of of war refugees from the Balkan Wars. Nikola Mazurov is very young. I think he was born in 1973, and like he said, Nishi, I've been in the hospital for more than a month, and no way will I recover for the next 2 months or so. So I thought, let me just read his poem, and it's very beautiful, very eloquent. Separated. I separated myself from each truth about the beginnings of rivers, trees, and cities. I have a name that will be a street of goodbyes and a heart that appears on X-ray films. I separated myself even from you, mother of all skies and carefree houses. Now my blood is a refugee that belongs to several souls and open wounds. My God lives in the phosphorus of a match, in the ashes holding the shape of the firewood. I don't need a map of the world when I fall asleep. Now the shadow of a stalk of wheat covers my hope, and my word is as valuable as an old family watch that doesn't keep time. I separated from myself to arrive at your skin, smelling of honey and wind, at your name, signifying restlessness that calms me down, opening the doors to the cities in which I sleep, but don't live. I separated myself from the air, the water, the earth. The earth I was made from is built into my home. Thank you, listeners, and thank you, everyone. Well, like the contagion we are fighting, like the changed social dynamics, the poems in our anthology, Singing in the Dark, underscore and highlight how distance structures social life. And they also address a very complex sense of loneliness. We hope our book will be part of our global cultural memory and our global literary history. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to all the distinguished poets who have joined me today. Uh, with that, I turn things over to Zach.
Nishi, thank you so much. This was, and to all the poets and to all the attendees and poets who didn't attend, whose poems we heard from a second hand. That was really fantastic. I hope I just put the link in again for purchasing the book, at least for that's the Amazon United States link. But if you can't find it there, just look it up on your favorite book selling site or service and try to find the copy of that. And also go to the Writer Center at writer.org and check out everything we have to offer. We have some other great events coming up too. So I hope that some of the new faces I saw here today become familiar faces at the next events that we hold. Thank you all so much. This has been fantastic. Have a good afternoon. I won't close the event quite right away. I'll let, in case anyone wants to unmute and say hello, but we are officially done. I thank you all for coming. Have a good afternoon, evening, morning, depending on where you are.